Hello and welcome to another Zoom meeting and podcast of Here's Tom with the Weather, where we investigate the plethora of higher powers that populate the vast universe of 12-step recovery, where alcoholics riff out on step 3 and step 11, as prescribed by the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, who encourage us to find some kind of higher power as long as it's not us. We speak to people with all manner of higher powers, from those who are atheists, Sufis, agnostics, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, followers of Islam, Hermetics, paganists, non-duality. We leave no stone unturned. It's our aim to promote understanding and open-mindedness so that alcoholics and addicts can find a higher power of their own to stay sober and carry the message. We promote tolerance and empathy for folks who might just have different spiritual practices than us. And please remember, this is not an AA meeting or an NA meeting or any kind of 12-step meeting. It's just a Q&A about some people's version of spirituality, whatever that might be. Sometimes we speak to seekers, to gurus, and people not necessarily in recovery, but today we are. And today's guest is Rami Shapiro. Hey, Rami, how are you?
Okay, David, how are you?
Good, mate. So got a bit of a bio here, as we do. So it's just a short little couple of paragraphs. And it goes like this. Rabbi Rami Shapiro is an award-winning author of over 36 books on religion and spirituality. He received ordination from the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion and holds a PhD in religion from Union Graduate School. He's a rabbinic chaplain with the US Air Force for 3 years, a congregational rabbi for 20, and a professor of religious studies for 10. Rabbi Rami currently co-directs the One River Foundation. All these details will be in chat. Rami is also a contributing editor at Spirituality and Health magazine, where he writes the roadside assistance for the spiritual traveler. He also hosts the magazine's bi-weekly podcast, Essential Conversations with Rabbi Rami. Good title. He's been in 12-step recovery for 15 years, and his 2 books on 12-step recovery are entitled Recovery, the Sacred Art, and Surrendered, Shattering the Illusion of Control, Falling into Grace with 12-Step Spirituality. And there you go. So that's your intro there, mate, and it's really good to see you. So first of all, I guess the big thing, we spoke on Monday. We did a bit of a pre-interview, and you describe yourself as a mystic. Could you just sort of clear up what your understanding of mystic is, or mysticism? What is that?
Yeah, so let me start by saying I don't describe myself as a mystic. I'm often called a mystic, but I don't choose labels like that for myself. But this is my understanding of what a mystic is. A mystic is someone who refuses to accept a higher power, God, Allah, Brahman, whatever you want to call it, secondhand through someone's reading, someone's teaching. They want to experience it directly, whatever it happens to be. So a mystic wants the direct experience of whatever truth with a capital T or reality with a capital R is. Mysticism is a form of, well, it doesn't always have to be religion, but every religion has a mystical form. Mysticism is a series of practices and teachings that are designed to prime the pump for that experience. I hesitate because the experience itself happens of its own accord. You can't make awakening happen, but you can prepare yourself for it when it happens. So mysticism is a way of preparing yourself through a variety of practices for that. And it comes in all kinds of flavors, because there's Christian mysticism and Islamic mysticism, Jewish mysticism, etc.
So I guess just to put it into layman's terms, you don't subscribe to dogma. The dogma, you don't sort of accept it. You go and explore it for yourself, and you find out what that is, where the spiritual side of that is, and for yourself, so you can have a mystical or a spiritual experience.
Right. Everything should be tested by yourself, as opposed to just accepted.
Okay, great. So could you tell us your journey? How did that happen for you? Why did you? Because I think from our understanding is that you were born into your faith, but what drove you to explore that side of it? What drove you to want to explore it yourself?
So I was born, I'm 70 years old, so I was born a long time ago into an Orthodox Jewish home, so a very observant Jewish home. And, you know, you just do what you do because your parents are doing it. And I did that until I was in my mid-teens, and I started to just question everything, and it made no sense. Judaism, and this is, blanket statement, but Judaism in the second half of the 20th century started to be basically an attempt to reclaim what was lost in the first half of the 20th century. In other words, the Judaism that was crushed by the Shoah, by the Holocaust, by the murder of 6 million Jews, all those individuals, the Judaism that they celebrated after the war, there was an attempt to reclaim, to make sure those traditions that they lived and died for didn't disappear. So it was very form oriented. It was about ritual and nothing else. We never talked about God or higher power or anything spiritual. It was just, okay, it's Saturday. This is what you do on a Saturday. And it's this holiday. This is what you do on this holiday. I was looking for something mystical, something experiential, having to do with the greater reality of which all life is a part. I couldn't find that in Judaism. In high school, in my junior year, there were 2 teachers who went to India on some kind of grant to study what they called Asian civilization. And they came back and taught classes in Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism. So I took those classes and I fell in love with that stuff, especially at that time, Zen Buddhism. And I found a Zen teacher, and I read all these books about Zen and Zen practice, and I began to practice, at least in my own mind, seriously. And I had an experience meditating on the shores of the Atlantic in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, where, I mean, I said I had an experience, so that's really wrong because I wasn't there when it happened. What in retrospect, what seems to happen is your sense of egoic self, the self with the little s, Rami disappeared. Something else was happening, but I wasn't there to observe it. When Rami consciousness came back into the body, I felt this overwhelming sense of connection with all reality. And I was just laughing. There was just this incredible outpouring of joy. I thought, well, that's what Zen is. I'm going to go after that. And I won't give you all the, the details, but I ended up getting a Zen master, and I got a degree in Zen study, in Buddhist studies as an undergrad, was going to go to graduate school. And my Zen master, at the end of one of these intensive retreats, took me aside and told me not to go to graduate school. My Zen master's name was Joshu Suzaki Roshi. He was this short and round Japanese fellow. And he was the same Roshi, the same Zen master that Leonard Cohen had. In fact, on one of these retreats, Leonard was the second in command. So I met Leonard Cohen through, not his music, though I'm a huge Leonard Cohen music fan, but through his work in Zen. And anyway, Suzaki Roshi took me aside and told me not to go to graduate school because academics would ruin my study of Buddhism. And if I was serious about enlightenment, which is the only point of being a Buddhist, I should move to his monastery, Mount Baldy Zen Center, and learn Japanese, because he spoke little English, learn Japanese and study Zen like regular Zen monks do. And I knew monk life was not for me. And so I didn't know what to say to him. So I just blurted out that I can't do that, Roshi, because I'm going to become a rabbi. Now, that was not in my head at all consciously. I was going to become a professor of Buddhist studies. But I said, no, I'm going to be a rabbi. And he started to laugh. And he said, because he has this heavy Japanese accent, oh, good, be a rabbi, be Zen rabbi. I said, okay, I'll be a Zen rabbi, just get off my case. And I did go to rabbinical school, and I kept my interest up in Asian religions, specifically Buddhism in the early days. I got much more interested in Vedanta Hinduism, and I've been initiated into the Ramakrishna order of Vedanta Hinduism. I've taught in India several times. I'm very eclectic, though still my root tradition is Judaism. But I'm always seeking for the same thing. I'm seeking for that experience, which I've had several times, I guess, to one extent or another, that experience where Rami is gone and there's just this happening that leaves me with this sense of deepening, ever deepening connection to life.
Sorry, just the happening. Can you explain that a little bit more? Can you delve a little bit further?
So, one of the things I love about Judaism is its language around the word God. So God is a noun, and we shouldn't use nouns, not just with regard to God, but there are no nouns in the universe. A noun is a thing. There are no things in the universe. Something may look static, but it isn't. If you get a microscope, you can see it's all dancing around inside of there. Everything is a happening. In Judaism, the most sacred name of God is not a name, but a form of a verb. It's literally unpronounceable, not just Jewish tradition says you can't say it. It's literally unpronounceable, but the letters are YHVH or Yud He Vav He. In your English Bibles, it'll translate it as Lord, but it's Lord is a noun, Lord is masculine, Lord is hierarchical. The actual four-letter name isn't any of those things. It's actually the future imperfect form of the verb to be or to happen. So in the Hebrew Bible, God is literally the happening is all happening. So what I'm looking for is when Rami slips more out of the picture, it's not like life ends or that I end, but there's just this borderless happening that is the universe. And when Rami comes back, there is an awareness of that on some subtle level. I don't know if that really helps, David, but
I think you're talking about the now or something. The now.
I mean,
the
anything
moment.
we say is going to be misleading.
It's a concept.
Yeah, right. And what we're looking for is to get beyond concepts into the actual experience. But if I have to use language, then I'll embrace happening.
This is fascinating. So how often does this happen, and how long do these happenings happen?
Oh, it happens to me. Oh, it just happened. I'm back. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know. I've had this experience several times over my life. It's not something that happens every day or in any sense frequently. But I've had it, and I've learned to trust it. So the last time I had something like this, if you're interested, I can tell you quick what happened.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm sure many of you are familiar with a teacher called whose name was Ramana Maharshi.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. So Ramana Maharshi is one of the great Indian saints of the 20th century. He died in 1950. And his whole approach to spiritual practice was what he called self-inquiry, where you simply notice yourself thinking something or feeling something or having a sensation of some kind. And you ask the question, who's thinking this? Who's feeling this? Who's sensing this? And you get a glimpse that there's a larger mind or consciousness that is observing you thinking or feeling or sensing. And you are this larger consciousness. It's not separate. It's not like I have one and David has one and Rochelle has one. It's just this cosmic mind of which you and I are variations or manifestation. So I have this teacher, his name is Prasanna. He doesn't have a school. He doesn't write books. He doesn't take students. I call him my teacher, but he really wouldn't say that was true for him. I happened to meet him through a mutual friend, and Prasanna's approach is he has a small little townhouse in California that some of his quote students have paid for, and he's just there. He's meditating. He's just living his life. And if you're interested, you can contact him, call him up, and go over and visit. And you can talk about whatever you want to talk about. He doesn't have a doctrine. He's not a Hindu, and he's just there. He's just a lovely Indian guy who is in the Ramana Maharshi school. So I started visiting with him as often as I could whenever I would be out in California. Now nobody can see him. He's in his mid-80s, and I talk to him on the phone once in a while just to check in and see how he's doing, but no one drops by anymore. But anyway, the last time was a couple of years ago. I went to see him, sitting in his living room, and he says, and we're just talking about nothing. I mean, nothing in particular, not nothing with a capital N. We're just talking, just chatting. And he says to me out of the blue, he goes, "What's your spiritual practice?" And I said, "Well, you know my spiritual practice. I mean, you taught me this self-inquiry thing. So that's what I do. I ask this question, who am I, or who's thinking this, or what is this?" And then he looks at me and he says, "Are you?" That's it. Just AREYOU. Are you? And I don't know what happened because I was gone. But in a different way than I had been before. Usually when this thing happened to me, everything is just like a blackout. And then I come back and I have no idea what was going on. This time, Rami was gone. There were no words in my head. There was nothing I could say. But there was an awareness of the space I was in. I couldn't say, oh, this is a chair and this is a couch and that's Prasanna and this is Rami. There was just awareness of whatever was in my field of vision. I was completely aware of it all, but without any thoughts about anything. And I was just sat there. And then a few minutes later, that passed. And I said to him, "What did you do?" And he said, "Let's get lunch." That was his
You're
response.
buying.
Yeah, you're buying. That's always fine. So I don't know what his take on it was. I don't know if this is something deliberate that he did, but it's just that realization. And this time it came to me in a different way than I'd had it before, that everything is part of a singular happening. And that's who you really are. You're really the greater happening and not just your egoic self. So that's the last time this thing.
How long ago?
A couple of years.
How long ago was that for you?
Couple of years ago.
Yeah. And that's Prasanna. Is that, how do you spell that? Prasana?
Maybe two N's.
Okay.
I mean, it's
okay.
It's Sanskrit. I don't know how it uses.
I'm sure there's going to be a few people in here who are going to be Googling as we speak. So
yeah, good luck. You won't. There's nothing there as far as I know.
Oh, well. Okay. Well, so moving along. So let's talk about the 12-step recovery. What part did your spiritual awakening take place with it? Was it before the 12, before you kind of, inverted commas, got sober, or did that happen as part of that? What part does the 12 steps play in that awakening?
No, yeah, 12-step comes later, and so does getting sober. If you want to use, I mean, I'm in Overeaters Anonymous, so
sure.
Getting my food clean. But the way that happened was, I was running one of these meditation retreats, and someone on the retreat needed to go to an AA meeting. And I had a car, she didn't. And I said, she found the meeting, and I said I would drive. So I took her to the meeting, and I said, geez, I'm just curious about what goes on. I'd love to go and sit in on a meeting. I think that would be allowed. And she said, no. I said, well, I don't want, I'm not going to go in and say I'm an alcoholic when I'm not. She said, you know what, go in, and this may not be kosher, but this is what I did. She said, go in, and when you qualify, just say, I don't know if I'm an alcoholic. So I did that, which was code to everyone in that room. This guy is an effing denial. Of course he's an alcoholic. So I sat there and was absolutely mesmerized by the quality of the people in that room, the honesty, the forthrightness in their conversation. And it wasn't just when they were sharing their struggles, because regardless of what, before the meeting, after the meeting, this seemed like a different category of human being. And I said to my friend afterwards, I said, boy, I wish I were an addict so I could go to these meetings. And she said, what do you mean you wish you were an addict? You are an addict. I said, what are you talking about? She said, you are addicted to food. And I said, no, I'm not. And then she started pointing out that from the moment I awake in the morning, I think about breakfast. As soon as I have breakfast, I'm already focused on lunch, and I'm eating in between, and I'm quite heavy, and I'm fat, and I'm eating all this food blindly, which of course is the whole point. But I realized, okay, maybe. So then I started going to OA meetings, and I would sit there in the beginning, qualified, but never really say anything. And I'm listening to people to share their story, and they're talking about eating out of garbage pails and doing all these things. And I'm going, isn't that normal? Doesn't everyone do that? Why is that a problem? And I realized, oh, I have a problem. So I discovered from other food addicts that I was a food addict, and then started taking programs seriously, taking the steps seriously, and working them. What happened, I mean, it helped tremendously. I'm no longer eating the way I'm eating. I still eat because I have to eat. But in OA, there's this concept, and I'm sure it's similar elsewhere, of trigger foods. And I discovered things that I can't just eat. I end up binge eating. And they, every time I could identify one, I stopped eating it, period, because cold turkey. So my weight is way down, but though that's not the concern of OA, but I'm eating in a much more healthy way because of 12-step. The more I worked the steps, the more I found the meeting to be shallow. It just wasn't, in my mind, this is just my opinion, that the 12-step program was much deeper, more spiritually challenging, and much more a mystical path, ultimately, than the meeting. In the meeting, I live in a very a Christian community, a Christian area. In the meeting, everybody's higher power was Jesus Christ. Everyone was praying to Jesus to help them out. There was no real, I don't know. I'm just going to stay with the word depth. There was no depth to what they were doing.
There's no seeking.
No seeking. No seeking. And so I started doing my own study of the 12-step, of each of the 12 steps. And eventually I found, well, first, there's just so much more to it than I was getting. And second, there was so much in other religious traditions that spoke to the steps as ways of deepening your understanding of the steps and your practice of the steps. And of course, in the meeting proper, in 12-step proper, you're not allowed to bring in outside information or outside books. So I wrote my own, just basically for myself, to show that there's so much more to this than what I was being told in a meeting. I don't know. Hopefully that's not offensive. And
no,
but when you were talking in the very beginning about the higher power, I mean, I hate the word higher power. I'm not happy with the word God either, but I think that the word higher power reflects a theology that was normative when AA started, but really is misleading, because higher power, like Lord, for that matter, suggests a hierarchy. It's higher, it's bigger than me, it's going to rescue me. And my experience through meditation and other contemplative practices, my experience is there's nothing higher. There's no higher power. There's a greater power. There's something larger than me that includes me, but transcends me. And what I want to do is tap into that level of consciousness that allows me to realize I am part of this greater power. And that's where I think the steps get all of their energy from, is from this greater reality of which we are a part. So I looked at the whole system from that point of a greater power, and didn't rely on meetings for my answers.
That's good advice.
Well, I don't give advice.
So you had a kind of a, when you inverted commas got sober, or you found the steps, you already had a concept, or you had a high, I don't want to use the word higher power, but you had a power, you had a spiritual outlook. And did the 12 steps help you to did that change your tack in any way? Did it help you in that way in your spiritual search? Did it enhance it? What did it do for your spirituality?
So what it gave me was the I don't know, the gift, the insight, whatever, of rock bottom and lack of control. Because in a lot of religious settings, the whole point of aligning yourself with your higher power, as opposed to this greater, but this higher power, is to empower you, right? So, I've got the mojo where I can control my life because I'm doing God's will, right? And God's will always turns out to be your will, just projected onto God. So you just say, I'm doing God's will. I don't know to what extent I was trapped in that kind of thinking, but I was definitely trapped in the idea of control. I mean, the best line to me in the big book is where Bill W. says the first thing you have to do is stop playing God. And that's what I won't speak for all of you, but that's what I was doing. I was playing God. And in fact, at one point, this is long before all of this, but I was almost kicked out of rabbinical school.
Oh my God. Because
of my theology, where I had already experienced and was committed to this, I honored my experience and was committed to this notion that I am part of this infinite happening. And I would preach from that perspective as part of my student training. And after one sermon on a Saturday, that following Monday, I was called into the head dean's office, and I was told that they were going to let me go because I was a megalomaniac. And I said, well, no, I'm not a megalomaniac. I said, a megalomaniac is someone who thinks, in my case, a megalomaniac is someone who thinks he's God. I don't think I'm God. I know I'm God. And the guy got so angry, he just kicked me out of his office, and they never raised the issue again. So I had this understanding, but what I didn't have was rock bottom, because the God of my understanding is just that. It's just the God of Rami's ego. And that God isn't God. And again, this is somewhat controversial for some people, but the idea of turning my life or my addiction over to a God of my understanding, that's just turning it over to another aspect of my ego. There's no liberation there. There's just a conceit that, I've done it, now I'm free. I don't think that's how it works. I think that the notion or experiencing the greater power, if you go with that language, is the prerequisite for doing that is to be shattered in what we call rock bottom. Mm-hmm. I think, I don't know if you want to go on with this a little bit, but if you bear with me, I think that's the whole Christian story. I think the genius of the Christian myth, and I don't mean myth in a negative falsehood way, I mean myth in the
narrative.
The narrative and the a myth is the way we impart some of the deepest truths that humans have understood in a story form. And when you have Jesus on the cross, that's a metaphor for hitting rock bottom. And in the first gospel, not the first one in a Bible, but the first one to be written is the gospel according to Mark. And in Mark's gospel, Jesus only says one thing while he's hanging on the cross. In John's gospel, he says he can't shut up. He keeps saying stuff, one thing after the other. But in Mark's gospel, the first gospel to be written, Jesus only says one thing. He says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, why have you forsaken me? It's the first verse of Psalm 22 in the Bible. And I've never heard someone preach on this text in a way that spoke to me. But when I looked at it from the point of view of 12-step and the mystical things that I've been playing with, what Jesus is saying when he says, my God, he's saying, the God I believed in, the God of my understanding, has forsaken me. That's absolutely essential for the resurrection, not just his, but ours. Until the God of our understanding is shattered on, when we hit rock bottom, and we're left absolutely helpless, and there's no ego left trying to control things. When we're absolutely shattered, crucified, or broken, then there is the potential possibility of experiencing the greater reality of which we are a part. And that's completely empowering, but not in the egoic way. Does that
yes, that's beautiful. So like you said, you mentioned that before about concepts. When we lose that concept of God, that when we're trapped in our head and we have an intellectual understanding, we lose that. That's that God is forsaken us, and we have to go elsewhere to surrender. And I really love the title of that book. Was it your second book, your most recent book, the Surrendered title? I just wanted to, if you could explain a little bit about that title, because we did have a chat about it. It was great.
Excuse me. So the title is Surrendered. It's in the passive tense, as opposed to surrender. I don't think you can surrender, because that's the ego again. So the God of my understanding is a projection of my ego. My egoic self, am going to surrender my life to this God of my understanding. That's not how it works. You can pretend, you can play this game. I'm surrendering, but then you're still in control. The I that's surrendering is still in control. My experience is that I is the I that gets crucified. You can be surrendered by reality, by the greater happening, by the greater power, by life itself. And I don't know if this is right, but the grace of addiction is that it shatters you. If you're lucky enough to have it happen, it shatters you in such a way that it leaves you absolutely helpless, at which point the ego is helpless, at which point the greater reality, the greater self, that is also you, but not just you, it's the whole universe, that greater self then causes the transformation, the liberation, the healing. So the book I wrote, Surrendered, Shattering the Illusion of Control and Falling into the Grace of 12-Step Spirituality. It's all about grace. When I was in the Zen world, it's what they talk about is something called jiriki, Japanese for self-power. You can do it. You'd be sitting there on the cushions for hours on end, and every once in a while, the Zen master might yell out, wake up now or die, something like that. And it's just, come on, work harder. It's like Marine boot camp, just work harder, and you'll get something. I did that for a very long time and got nothing. And I ended up calling one of my Buddhist teachers from a long time ago. And I said, I'm doing what you taught me and it's not working. I didn't go to my Zen master. I went to a Buddhist priest who was also a college professor in Buddhist studies. And I said, this isn't working. He said, yeah, I understand. Come and see me. So I flew up to see him. I was living in Miami, Florida. He was in Massachusetts. I flew up to see him. We went out to lunch. We sat and talked. And I told him, every day I sit, I do all these meditation things that I learned from you and from Joshu Suzuki Roshi and all this stuff. And it's not working. And he says, okay, now I can tell you, it doesn't work. We always say it works if you work it, talking about the steps. He says, it doesn't work because the you that's doing all the work is the problem. It's just reinforcing yourself. That we have to shift from what the Japanese call jiriki, self-power, to tariki, other power. And that's when the small self, crucified, shattered, hits rock bottom, and is surrendered by reality to the greater self. And then things happen. But then it's not you, it's grace. Then it's not your control, it's through grace. And that's been my experience. And that's why I wrote this other book. One last thing I would like to say about all of this stuff that I've done with 12-Step. I look at the program, I look at the big book, the way I was taught as a rabbi to look at the Bible as a narrative to be unpacked, that there's layer upon layer upon layer of insight in the text. 12 steps, 12 traditions, it's a big book. There's so much more information in these things than we would get by just a surface reading. And so the book Surrendered really just focuses on the notion of higher power versus greater power, grace versus will, and the gift of being surrendered, the gift of rock bottom that gives you the opportunity to be surrendered. So I think all of this is in there. I think Bill W. was a great mystic teacher. Whether or not he knew it, I don't know. But I think he was onto something so much deeper than we give him credit for. And I tried to bring some of that out in these two books.
What a fantastic answer. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Final question from me. Just to give a bit of a plug, we're on Facebook. We have a Facebook page, which we update regularly about everything that's coming up. So if you want to join the Here's Tom with the Weather Facebook page, just go look for the name on Facebook. We've also got a YouTube channel where you can see this interview and many other of the past interviews that you want to come along. And also to keep the Zoom, this is totally free. We just pay for the Zoom account and it's just our time. So if you want to contribute a few shekels here and there, then go to gilwriter@hotmail.co.uk. That's GILWRITER @hotmail.co.uk. Just a few bucks will help us keep the Zoom account going. It doesn't go into my pocket, I promise you. So I just wanted to go back. This is a question I ask a lot of my guests, and it's something that it's been occurring to me lately, and I put it to you because I'm sort of looking at it. Could it be that awareness and consciousness is a trick of evolution, and that basically we're just the spinal cords are plugged into the brain, and it gives us the illusion of that there's nothing else out there, and that it is a dead matter world? I'm just putting that. I don't know if this isn't necessarily my belief, but could it be that consciousness is an illusion, and that it's just an evolutionary point to give us meaning to keep going on, so we can procreate and we can pass our DNA down the generations?
Well, if you're asking me, I would think anything could be, right? I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. I think that, maybe because I don't want to think so, I don't know. But
okay.
But I think that consciousness is, the universe is conscious, not the way you and I are conscious, or not even the way that you and I might define consciousness, which would be self-conscious. I think the universe is conscious in some other way, and that you and I are simply aspects of the way the universe is conscious. I mean, when there's this guy, Douglas Harding, who wrote a book called On Having No Head, where he tried to give you this realization that you can see all of your body. Of course, you can't see your back, but you can see your front side, but you can't see your head, and you've never seen your head. You know it's there because you can touch it, but you've never actually seen it. You've seen reflections, photographs, mirrors, images, but you've never actually seen your head. And the idea he puts forth is that right now, Rami or the universe is looking at itself from the perspective that I call Rami. And each one of you is the universe looking at itself from the perspective of, whomever you happen to be. And that's consciousness to me. So I think consciousness is real, but self-consciousness is what Einstein called an optical delusion. It looks like you and I are separate, so we create this whole story about being separate, but we're really like waves on a single ocean, that each one is unique and distinct, but there's no real separateness. We're all just the ocean waving. So I think consciousness is real. But you don't know that for a fact, though. You don't know. I don't think I know anything like that for a fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. It's a tricky question, and it's something that I've been pondering lately. So I'm going to hand you over.
Who's been pondering it?
Good question.
I mean, it's like, if there's.
I am.
If there's no consciousness, then you've just been spinning your wheels.
This is a conversation that could go around in circles for ages, but let's not.
Exactly.
Joe C is a regular panelist here. Joe's got a couple of questions. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks very much, Rami Shapiro. I really got a lot out of that. Other OA members have inspired me. There was a guy named Philip Z. I don't know if you ever came across him, but he was a secular Jew, a therapist. He had an appreciation for Eastern philosophy and religion, and he wrote a book called A Skeptic's Guide to the 12 Steps in the early 90s. And it sort of opened my eyes to the idea of, reframing things in a sort of intuitive and personal way, as opposed to, submitting to dogma, just sort of opening ourselves up. And I love what you say about greater power, not higher power. And I'm also experimenting with my relationship with food. I went sort of plant-based diet. I'm experimenting with fasting. And can you talk a little bit about just the sort of foods sort of side of things, our relationship as human beings, as our attraction and revulsion from things, and how we get sort of trapped in that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a giant conspiracy by the food companies. I think that people are evolutionarily drawn to sugar, fat, and salt. I mean, you need those things to survive. And then when Frito-Lay here in the States, I guess, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but when the Frito-Lay company realized that this is what the brains of humans crave, they started mass producing foods that are basically just vehicles for sugar, fat, and salt. And so it's just like nicotine and cigarettes. They're designed, the product is designed to hook you. So, I mean, there certainly are other aspects to food addiction, because I eat to celebrate. I eat when I'm sad. I don't need an excuse. I just eat. But I do think that the evolutionary biology tells us that the human body needs these things, and then the corporations have been using that to their advantage, our disadvantage. What I do is try to eat as simply as possible, but I'm not perfect at any of this. But there's certain things I know I can't touch. This morning, I was out with my grandson and his mom, and he wanted to go for ice cream. And he said, would I go? So I said, sure, I'll go, but I'm not going to have any ice cream. And he said, but you can take joy in my enjoyment. He's 5. And I said, okay, I will enjoy your enjoyment. But then he sat down with his ice cream cone, and he's sitting across from me, and he looks at me and he looks at the cone and he says, don't even think about it. Like I was going to just take it. Don't even think about it. So, the temptation is always there, but I know that it's poison to me. So I don't eat those things. But I'm always discovering other things that are stoked with sugar, fat, and salt that I just didn't even know was in the process of making the food. So it's always a discovery about, okay, you shouldn't eat this, shouldn't eat that. But when I know something like the ice cream, when I know, he could have a little kid size. There was no way. If I ordered ice cream, there were 5 or 6 different flavors. I'd have to have scoops of all of them in a big bowl, and I would eat it all. So I know that I can't do that at all. But when I know what it does to me, physiologically and psychologically, maybe even spiritually, but certainly physiologically and psychologically, if I just look at it from what Judaism calls spacious mind, or Buddhism calls big mind, the attraction isn't as strong. So let me put it this way, and I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but I work at home. I'm sitting in my home office. Off to my left is the kitchen and a refrigerator, and I can't swear this is true, but I think the refrigerator has a little megaphone, and it's always going, come to me, come to me. So, I get these cravings. And a lot of times I'll walk over to see what's in the refrigerator, and I open the door and I see something that, my wife likes, but I'm not going to eat, hopefully. And then this war starts in my head. So one voice says, oh, come on, you've been really good. When was the last time you had anything like this? You just have some of it. She had cheesecake in there the other day. She said, you could just have a little bit of cheesecake. And the other voice says, no, you can't have a little bit of cheesecake. You would eat all the cheesecake that's left in there. And these two voices going on and on and on. If I listen to that battle, I know from experience that the voice that says, oh, go eat the cheesecake wins every time. But if I don't do that, if I just listen, if I just let them battle it on, but I shift from which one am I at the moment, if I shift to that more spacious place where I'm observing the madness of these voices in dialogue, when I shift to that more spacious place, I can actually close the refrigerator and just go back to work. So for me, the work is to continually shift from narrow mind, which is always attracted to whatever you're addicted to, from narrow mind to spacious mind, which has no addictions or sees the addictions, but isn't entrapped by them. Does that make sense? I mean, otherwise I can give you specific foods, but that's not going to be true for everybody.
No, yeah, I wanted on sort of a grander sense because I think it makes sense for everybody. David, I could go on, but I'm sure a lot of questions have been inspired and other people will have some.
Thanks very much, Joe. Good to see you here again. Like I say, any questions, send them in chat. We've got one here from our resident free thinker, Jeb, has sent me this, and it's a good one. Good on you, Jeb. Since the word God is neither Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, why do you still use the word? Isn't there a better word that doesn't imply an external physical being?
Yeah, habit. It's habit. Martin Buber was asked that question once. He's a major Jewish philosopher in the 20th century. Martin Buber was asked that once because he doesn't believe in it either. And he gave a better answer. He said, because it's so ubiquitous in the language, everyone uses the word, I want to use it in a way that will maybe shatter the way most people use the word. But I'm not that conscious. The word just comes out. When I'm teaching, I don't use it. The word I prefer is either happening, or I love this term that I'm always off on the century. So 1800s, 19th century, this 19th century Russian rabbi, his name is Rabbi Twersky. He was called the Chernobyl Rebbe, the master who lived in the town of Chernobyl. And he had this term for God that in Hebrew, it's chayut, from the word chai, life. And it just means aliveness. And I like that word. To me, that sounds like Tao, which I also like. The universe is this aliveness happening. And, or is this alive, I'm trying to get rid of nouns, so I'm having trouble, but is this aliveness? And that is a truer, in my mind, that is a truer understanding of what this big reality is than the word God. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. There's a good question here from Virginia. I don't know if Virginia wants to ask it herself. Are you okay? Virginia's just come back from hospital, so it's really good to see you here. She's looking fine and healthy. So Virginia, ask your question.
Hi, I'm really loving how you're discussing the steps and the breakdown and then bringing in the mysticism, which I've always felt. One of the things that I think this program does so beautifully is beg the question of going deeper on those 12 steps, looking beyond the surface. So thank you. But my question is, I would like to hear your take and your experience of steps 6 and 7, looking at the idea of character defects and then the removal and stuff.
Yeah, so I think defects are built into the system. You can't have, you can't have good without bad. You can't have up without down, in without out. That defects are just part of the whole system. And it's a given. Whether they're debilitating or not, that depends on a lot of other factors, but defects are a given. I don't try to remove them. I try to be able to look at them from a more spacious perspective. Because if I'm trying to remove them, the I, and I'm just repeating myself, the I that's trying to remove them is the I that has them. So I'm trying to do this self-surgery, and in my experience, it doesn't work for me. I can't willfully, I mean, if I could do this, I'd be in control. But I think when I'm trying to be in control, I'm playing God, and you got to stop playing God. And I don't mean aliveness. I mean God, that external supernatural notion that is, I don't believe in, but you're playing that. So my approach is to simply be aware of defects and just let them be there. And when I let them be there, as opposed to try to weed them out or beat them down, they are inert. They don't, if I don't feed them with, no pun intended, if I don't feed them with energy, whether it's a positive energy, I'm going to embrace my defects, which I think is also absurd, or I'm going to kill my defects. Either way, I'm feeding my defects. I would rather just step back and say, yeah, you're broken like everybody else. You're screwed up like everybody else. You have the capacity to be an asshole like everybody else. Don't feed it. Don't argue about it. Don't do anything except know it's there and move on. There's a Hasidic Jewish mystical proverb. I forgot what rabbi said it, but he says, if you imagine a pot of garbage, he says, you can stir the garbage clockwise and you can stir the garbage counterclockwise. It's always a pot of garbage. Why not just leave the pot alone and string pearls for the sake of heaven? Do something positive and not deal with the garbage. And that's sort of the approach I take. So I know the defects, I do moral inventory on a regular basis. I know the defects that are there, but I don't want to empower them by feeding them in any way. If you don't feed them, they sort of, I don't know, shrivel up is the right word, but they don't do anything because I'm not living into them. Does that make sense?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Virginia. So we've got a few more questions. I just wanted to ask you, come in one, and you mentioned before your conversation with your teacher, with your professor, I think when you're at university. What sort of, have you copped a lot of flack in terms of, because of your mysticism and going away from your original faith or from your prescribed religion? Has there been issues with that? Have you gone against the grain, and has that caused people to renounce you or chuck you or give you loads of grief?
Yeah, nobody cares about me enough to renounce me, chuck me, or give me loads of grief.
I'm trying to be nice, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well, they tried to kick me out of rabbinical school, and then when I did graduate rabbinical school, not because I had these Buddhist or Hindu interests, but because of my theology that this God didn't exist, or the God we normally think about. When I tried to start a congregation in Florida, the big Reform rabbi in Florida, because I went through the Reform movement, would travel up and down the state to try to get rabbis to sign on to a letter saying, "Don't let him come here." Now, in the rabbinic movement, they have no control where you go. It's just a graduate degree, but still, he wanted them to put pressure. And when I did move to Florida and I tried to start a synagogue in the Reform context, they told me no, they wouldn't have me. So it was radical. It's not radical anymore. I was among a small handful of people who were teaching these kinds of things. Now, Hasidic teachings, Kabbalah, it's just popular and you find it all over the place. But now it doesn't make any difference. But I haven't been, you're vulnerable when you have a congregation, if that's your livelihood. My approach was always to have a second job just in case. So I had a job in the business world that I actually made more money doing that than being a rabbi. So I wasn't threatened, if it never came to it, but if my theology ever caused me to lose my job, I could walk away. It wouldn't really, I could still survive. But now, like I said, it's all over the place. And my interest, I mean, I'm Jewish and I still use the title rabbi, and I still study Jewish text. I mean, I like being Jewish, but I'm not, my work is not in that field, really. My work is in what's called perennial wisdom, which is the four basic teachings that are at the heart of every every mystical system, regardless of the religion. Really quick, just so I don't leave that hanging. I mean, the first one is that, and we've talked about it really, everything is part of this one dynamic happening. Number two is you as a human being have the innate capacity to awaken in, with, and as this happening. Three, awakening as this aliveness, it provides this inner call to, in biblical terms, to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. That's Genesis 12:3. But to be a blessing to all the families of the earth, human and otherwise. And then the fourth one is awakening to aliveness, and being a blessing is the whole purpose of being human. That's your calling as a human being. Every religion has some version of that. And that's what I teach. I mean, I lead retreats still a little, not so much anymore because of COVID, but when I'm on the road, when I used to be on the road, I mean, I taught that more than I taught, Judaism or anything with an ism at the end.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We've had so many guests on this podcast now over the last year, and from all kinds of extreme parts of the spectrum, and they end up all saying the same thing, which is just, it's fascinating. So we're into the sort of the final straight. So we've got a few questions here, so we'll have to be quick. So Deborah from LA has asked a hell of a good question. I don't really understand it, but I'll put it to you anyway. My question is, how can you balance breaking the idolatrous anthropomorphic God and personal connection?
Wait, so help me understand that. Deborah, is that right?
Yeah, Deborah. So Deborah, I'm going to unmute you, but just be quick, okay? So Deborah in LA, there you go, you're unmuted. Deborah, you still there? Just unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm going to try to say quick. We don't, Judaism doesn't promote an anthropomorphic God, but there is that kind of grandpa in the sky concept that lingers. And then yet we're told that, God, Hashem, took us out of Mitzrayim. We're supposed to say it every day. So there's supposed to be some kind of personal connection. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say?
Okay, I think so, sure. I mean, the mythology of Judaism, like the mythology of Christianity and Islam, is a supernatural, all-powerful, all-good creator God who is, I mean, you're right, no religion says that God actually has hands and feet and legs, but they all use those terms because they're all based on just taking a man, not a person, but a man, and blowing him up into a cosmic reality. So I reject that. I just think that's for little kids. And I think that you outgrow that God, which is why so many people are leaving these religions that insist upon that kind of imaging. But the personal connection, and even, she said, a God who takes you out of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is Egypt. So you have that whole Exodus metaphor. But from the Jewish mystical point of view, the word in Hebrew, Mitzrayim, for Egypt is a play on words. It means from the narrow places. So the narrow places of addiction, the narrow places of enslavement. When you shift from narrow mind, mochin to katnut in Hebrew, to spacious mind, mochin to godlut, when you shift from the little s self to the big S self, and you realize you are this aliveness, or this aliveness is you, there is a liberation from all the narrow places. So the personal connection is still real. It's just not supernatural. It's not someone outside who's helping you out and rewarding and punishing you. It's something or some dynamic of which you are a part, that when you realize you're a part of it, that realization is liberating.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Deborah. Thanks for elaborating that. Nina asks, who's got one of the nicest living rooms in Los Angeles, How do you reconcile all the current information on trauma in the body that we can see happens in childhood development with spirituality and recovery?
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, that's sort of above my pay grade because there's so much to the notion of the body carrying trauma. My experience is that the shift, and hopefully I'm not, this is simple, but hopefully not simplistic. The shift to spacious mind actually liberates the body from trauma. And the deeper you get into spacious mind, the more liberation there is. So, because the body and the mind are not separate things. And I guess from the question, I know you know that. I mean, I would say body, mind, heart, soul, spirit, it's all the same dynamic. But when I'm in that larger frame of mind, the trauma becomes less and less controlling. So here's one way to look at it that I just learned this from Colin Wilson. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Colin Wilson. So I don't know if you like Colin Wilson. You don't like Colin Wilson.
The occult.
Yeah, he's into the occult as a scholar. But he's got this great metaphor. And he says, imagine a full piano keyboard, 88 keys. And you've got this all 88 keys, but you only play the keys in the middle of the board, you know, just a small section of the keys. And that's where you live. That's all you think there is. And so you get all tied up with what you can do in that little area. And then suddenly through some, you know, surrendering process or some awakening process, you realize, whoa, there's another 80 keys here that I could be playing on. It doesn't make the few keys you were using, they don't disappear. It just means now it's part of a much larger series of options. The musical possibilities are so much greater. So imagine that the trauma we carry is fed and fostered by the focus on the small number of keys that we play on. If through spiritual practice, you could access the rest of the physical, emotional, spiritual, you know, keyboard, you wouldn't get rid of the trauma, but the trauma would be so much less impactful because you are so much larger. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but that's what comes to me.
Interesting analogy. Thanks very much, Nina. Good to see you. Michael Stacey, who's co-host here. Mike, do you want to ask this question or do you want me to do it, mate? Yeah, you can go.
That question was actually from another participant in chat. If you just read it as
do you want to read it, mate?
Yeah, let me find it. Hold on. Here we go. I'm sorry. About the greater power. Did I hear you say we might be part of a greater power rather than have a greater power?
Yes.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, the metaphor is the ocean and the wave. The wave doesn't have the ocean. The wave is a manifesting of the ocean. So what you're trying to do, what I'm trying to do, is to continually, without denigrating the wave, shift to the oceanic consciousness and recognize, oh, I am a wave of this much larger reality, and I am that larger reality.
Thank you very much. Okay, so listen, we've just about done up for time. I'm going to ask you the final question. Just to say to everyone, just remember that we're on Facebook. If you want to know about all the upcoming, we've got some really big guests coming up over the next few months. So get all about that on Facebook, our Facebook page, which is in the chat. We're also on YouTube, where you'll be able to hear this and share this meeting around, and all the this interview and all the other interviews that we've done in the past. And as I say, we are looking just for a few quid, a few bob, a few bucks to keep this Zoom account going. As I say, it's all we do is we spend time. We don't make no money from it. And we've got all of Rami's details in chat there. So the final question is this, Rami. Book sales have gone through the roof, and you have and your other job. What is your other job?
Well, I don't have it anymore. Yeah. Oh. No. I was a business consultant.
Nice. Okay.
I taught communication skills.
Oh, wow. I bet you excelled at that. So the job, everything's come together, and you've made your fortune, and you've retired. You've taken the whole family, and you've bought a super yacht. And you've set sail from somewhere on the East Coast. I don't know where, but you've set sail from the East Coast, and you've got your whole family, you've got all your possessions and all your favorite books and everything in this yacht, and you head south. You go around South America, you head up into the Pacific, and somewhere off the coast of Fiji, the super yacht strikes a hidden reef. So it's rapidly sinking. So you chuck the family overboard, they get in the lifeboat, they head to a nearby deserted island. You've got a few seconds left before the boat goes under. You run into your den and you get your favorite book, a plastic bag, chuck the book in the bag, dive overboard and hightail it, swim your way over to the deserted island to await rescue. What's the book? Who's it by? And why?
Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, because I think it's the most, it's only 81 poems. It's the simple, direct expression of what reality is all about. So I would go for the Tao Te Ching. Can I just add one other thing, because I threw it up in the chat. Someone asked me in the chat about the 4 points of perennial wisdom. If you go to oneriverfoundation.org, all that information is listed. But also the questions that I was asked, and just it seems to me the quality of this conversation is such that if anyone's interested, I work for Spirituality and Health magazine. I write a Q&A column. People send me questions on email. I put spiritualityhealth.com. That's the magazine. You can write at Rabbi Rami, spiritualityhealth.com, and you could send questions. If that doesn't work, just, you know what, because I actually mean this. Let me just give you my email. So I'm not interested in, no, that's not working. No. I'm not doing this fast enough. Other people are putting things in there before I can do this. So here's my email address.
If you just read it out to us as well, because it's obviously we're going to be audio as well as people won't see the chat. So
okay, so it's rabbirami@gmail.com.
Wow.
And it's very simple. rabbirami@gmail.com. I'm not looking for I'm not looking for pen pals, but if you have a general question that you think other people would be interested in, send me the question. I do my best to answer regardless. I just send you a response. But I'll send the questions on to my editors at Spirituality and Health. They might think it has a universal interest, and then it'll get in the magazine. They'll change everything, so you won't even know you question. But
typical editors,
well, they they try to change if you make any reference to who you actually are, they'll make sure it never shows up. But I'm always looking for questions for the magazine. I've been doing it 12 years. There's always a fear that, oops, no more questions, I'm done. And I like that job.
Thank you very much. This has been just such another fantastic Q&A, another fantastic interview, and I'm really grateful you come. And I hope you come back and see us, because we have all sorts of guests on this every week, and it'll be just great to stay in touch with you. So thank you very much. So and we always have a bit of a Q&A, a bit of fun afterwards with the people. We've got sort of 50, 60 people still in the room. So if you want to hang around, they might raise their hands and give you a hard time. Probably better questions than I've asked, that's for sure. So, but I'm going to end recording now. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next Friday on Zoom and on YouTube and on iTunes and Spotify. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Thank you.